Hey everybody, welcome to class with Professor Mead. Today we're going to talk about socialization and the construction of reality. These are our think, pair, share questions for today. Take a moment to pause the video and try to write down the answers to see if what you already know prior to the lecture. So the first thing we're going to talk about is socialization. So what is that? In a very general sense of the term, it's the process that we as individuals use to learn the expectations of the culture and the society that we grow up in. It's the process of learning how to behave in our society. So most of us, almost all of us, are conformists. We all tend to become conforming members of society. And we do this mostly actually to avoid things like embarrassment, fear of being condemned or ridiculed or ostracized. So in that way, socialization becomes a very powerful form of social control. And that has both positive and negative benefits, just like we talk about with a lot of things in sociology, that it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. So don't make a value judgment. Be careful, right? It's the way in which we teach other people to be conforming members of society. So in that way, it is a powerful form of control. So does society make us human? Are we human without the idea or without a society to grow up in? If we were to grow up in isolation, would we be what we consider to be human? Now, we do know, based on evidence, because the hypothesis has been posed for quite a long time in linguistics, is that human beings lack an internal instinct for language or to take the place of language. We instinctually can develop language in our younger years at a very rapid rate, and we can learn multiple languages and everything, but it's not instinctual to us. A lot of things that are socialized to us feel instinctual, but they're not. So a good example that I like to use in terms of what feels instinctual but is actually socialized is the way we do certain symbols like nodding our head. Yes, no, right? So take a moment with me, nod your, shake your head no. It feels pretty natural. Now, in some cultures, there's additional head nods. Like in Indian culture, they do a side-to-side wobble, right? I'm doing it kind of big, but they do like a side-to-side wobble, and that can mean I'm listening, I understand, I agree with you, right? If they like you, they'll do that little wobble. So take a moment and try to do that wobble. See how that feels. For me, it's extremely uncomfortable. And that's because I'm not socialized into that type of head movement. But if you do, that's why saying no or saying yes feels comfortable, because we've done it for so long. We're actually conforming to something that's common within our society. That's a form of socialization. It's subtle. It's so subtle, it feels instinctual. So we were talking about language. Language itself. Because that question's been posed, and because the question of is it society that makes us human, or is it our own instincts, our biology that makes us human, we have looked at different types of children within society, and we have asked that question. So there's three main types of children who have come under situations where their lives can be used to add to the body of knowledge. And that is feral children, isolated children, or institutionalized children. I'll explain what that means in a minute. We cannot do an experiment on this because that would be extremely unethical. You can't take a child and remove them from society to be able to do like what we would consider like a blind experiment, or what you would think of as like a medical experiment, right? Remember the different types of experiments that we learned about in methods? So we can't do that. That's unethical. So when it naturally occurs, we use that opportunity to be able to understand and address hypotheses that we have on this question of socialization. Feral children are children who are raised by animals. So that could be wolves, dogs, monkeys, right? Where they have more socialization with an animal raising them than they do a human beings in general. Isolated children are children that have been removed from society, maybe locked up by their parents or for some other reason, and neither human beings nor animals have socialized them at all. So that's an isolated child. And then an institutionalized child or institutionalized children are children who are in institutions where they don't have one-on-one care. So when you think of an orphanage that has one person caring for 10, 20, 30 children, right? So they can feed them and diaper them and you know, give them their basic needs, but they're not talking to them and carrying them around and loving them and giving them all that kind of attention, right? That's an institutionalized child. And so what happens is we have seen that with institutionalized children, their intelligence, their IQ is actually significantly impacted in a detrimental way. They tend to have lower IQs simply because they're not carried and talked to and mostly just held. When they put those children in one case study with mentally challenged adults for one-on-one care, all of those children, they followed them through their lives. All of those children grew up with normal IQs and did fairly well in school, whereas the children who didn't have that one-on-one care ended up institutionalized more often than not themselves as adults. Isolated children give us the chance to ask this question, so does society make us human? Because we can see what happens to a person if they don't have any type of socialization at all. And this has a huge detrimental impact on children who don't have any type of socialization, both to their IQ, language, cognitive ability, and ability to socialize and understand other human beings. And then with feral children, what happens is they start to feel more comfortable being around and acting as though they are the animal that raised them. And so that changes what they feel is instinctual or comfortable for them. So let's talk about a few of the theories of socialization. Let's start with Charles Horton Cooley's theory. By the way, this theory is micro-level symbolic interaction, and it's the looking glass self. So it's symbolic interaction because we're talking about how we interact as individuals with society and how society interacts with us, right? So the theory of the looking glass self, George Horton Cooley's theory, is a self-perception that is influenced by other people's reaction, right? It helps you develop your self-concept. In other words, we imagine that we appear to others how they react to us. And because they react to us in a certain way, we develop a self-concept based on that. So if I am the tallest person in my family, my community, of anybody I've ever met, right? And everybody believes I'm super tall, you know, and it's something that people agree on and I feel and I see, even if I'm 5'3", I would have the perception of being tall. It's not so much the data or the facts, but the perception of others and how we perceive ourselves. So that's George Horton Cooley, right? And he's symbolic interaction theory, because this is our interaction with others and how that changes. Socialization of self and mind is the other micro level theory that's also symbolic interactionist, because it's talking about how we communicate and interact with each other as individuals and with society. So this theory from Mead focuses on the self as I and as me. So the I is yourself as subject. It's my opinion of myself. It's my unsocialized self. The me is the awareness of how other people expect me to act when I'm in any given social situation. So let me give you an example of this. Probably about 20 years ago, when I was in graduate school in Texas, geez, that's a long time. I was in the grocery store and I had a broken ankle, and a gentleman kicked me in the ankle and I screamed, but I didn't just scream, I cussed. And so the I opinion of myself says that's totally fine. The me is aware that other people expect you never to cuss, even in a situation where you might be hurt. And I received a very fervent negative social sanction for this, because the gentleman who kicked me in the ankle, my broken ankle, also reprimanded me for cussing loudly in the grocery store. So the I and the me, right? Our unsocialized self is the I, or myself as subject, and the me is myself as object, my awareness of myself. And we learn this through taking on the role of the other. So Mead says there's two different types of other: a significant other and a generalized other. A significant other is anybody who's significant to you in your life. It's not just a partner. It's anybody who you value their opinion, even if it's a small value of their opinion. So your friends and your family, your colleagues, your boss, all of those people are significant others. So to understand yourself and how you're supposed to act, you think about how your mom wants you to act, or how your spouse wants you to act, or how your colleagues want you to act. The generalized other, on the other hand, is the straw man. It's the they out there in society, right? They are going to think ill of me. They are going to think this looks silly, right? It's not somebody in particular that you know. It is just a very general sense of people out there. If I don't wear pants when I leave the house, they are going to be upset, and they are probably going to call the police on me, right? So let's talk, before we move on, just really quickly about how this influences us throughout our lifespan, because he did believe that socialization was learned over a lifespan at different degrees. From 0 to 3 is the imitation stage, and that essentially means that you are still trying to figure out the world around you. You're trying to see, smell, touch, those kinds of things. That's why babies are always putting everything in their mouth, because they're learning about the world around them. And so at this stage, Mead doesn't think that you're strongly influenced by others, even your significant others. The next stage is 3 to 6, and this is the pretend stage. So you'll often see children who love to pretend school, pretend house, right? Pretend with a baby, pretend with a car, that kind of thing. That's the play stage. Also at this stage, 3 to 6, it's prior to being able to understand the role of the generalized other. At this time, you do understand what mom and dad expect of you, or maybe your siblings or your grandparents expect of you, but you don't have a sense of the generalized other. That's why when you go to see a soccer game filled with 5-year-olds, it's like watching a bunch of bees, right, following the ball. Even the goalie will be chasing after the ball with that, that little herd, right, of bees. And that's because they don't have an idea of the generalized other, which means they don't understand that they're playing a position within a larger macro level organized sport. That doesn't generally happen until you're about 7 years old. And so that's when you start to see children be able to understand the generalized other. So then they know, okay, I'm supposed to stay back by the goal, or I'm supposed to be following the ball closely, or I'm supposed to be protecting somebody, that type of thing, right? At about 7 to 10. And then the next stage up is what we call the role-taking stage. And so, as you move into your teen years, now you don't just have a, understand that you have significant others and generalized others having an opinion of you, but you can switch from your perspective, your self-centered perspective, into someone else's perspective. So now you're a better gift giver, right? You're not going to give them your favorite toy. You're going to give them their favorite toy. Okay, let's move on. The next person we're going to talk about is Jean Piaget, and I like him. He looks funny. He looks cute to me. And so he talks about learning personality, morality, and emotions. This dude was like very intellectual even as a child. And so I think his research on this basically starts at like 11 years old or something like this. He becomes interested in learning over time. So he divides up the stages to sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. And he says that in your sensory motor stage, you have an understanding of the environment, but it's limited to direct physical contact. Again, what you can put in your mouth as a baby, what you can touch, what you can taste, those kinds of things. You don't understand your body is separate from the environment, and you can't think logically. You can't do any kind of inductive or deductive reasoning. If the cookie goes behind mom's back, it disappeared, right? If you can't see a part of your body, it doesn't exist. The next stage is pre-operational. At this stage, you can generally count, but you don't understand numbers. Usually at this stage, most children can count to 10. You can't take on the role of the other, so you do tend to be pretty selfish. Doesn't matter if mom or dad is exhausted. If you're hungry and you want a bath, you're going to throw a fit to get your food and your bath if that's what you want. You're still developing your ability to use symbols. That's why sometimes you'll see kids at like 2 or 3 years old, they'll say you, me, you, because they're mimicking you still instead of understanding this is me and this is you, because they can't understand the role of the other when you're explaining it to them. They also might say, yes, I want it, right? Because, and shake their head no at the same time because they're still developing those symbols. But they are starting to learn things like concept, speed, size, causation, that type of thing. After about 7, you then move into what he calls the concrete operational stage. And so children understand causation, they understand numbers and speed. The reasoning abilities become really concrete. You also see in their art, it becomes very concrete and very factual kind of, right? They try to find exactly what they, like draw a picture of exactly how it is instead of an artistic interpretation. They don't necessarily understand abstract concepts unless concrete examples are given. If you ever notice your teachers are constantly trying to give you an abstract example and then give you an abstract concept and then give you an example. And the reason is because most of us don't still understand abstract concepts until we start to hear examples. Think about a concept like honesty. What does that mean and how would you define it without giving an example? It's challenging, right? The next stage then is formal operational stage. And this is where not only does abstract thinking become possible, but you don't need the example anymore to be able to understand it, and you can make a conclusion about something abstract based on the formal rules of that concept. And so that's the most advanced kind of level of thinking. Now, not necessarily tied to conventional intelligence in some ways, because you can be a doctor and still be in the concrete operational stage, or you can be a 5-year-old and already be in the formal operational stage. And so an example of this, a 5-year-old who not only can count to 10 and 100, but that they understand that numbers go off into infinity and that you can't actually count all the way up because they just keep going out into infinity. That is understanding the formal understanding numbers on a formal operational stage. So let's talk now about socialization and specifically how social structures play a role in socialization. So a social structure is essentially any typical pattern that's formalized within a society. You probably don't even realize these are social structures on you. There's social structures based on your class, your race, your sex, all of these things, right? But what about that guides your behavior? And those things are actually established before we are born. The expectation of how I'm going to act as a female teacher versus how I'm expected to act as a male teacher was established long before I arrived in this society, right? So the role that I am occupying has already been set up for me. So think about this in terms of gender. That's a good way to think about it, right? So gender is the social structured expectation, and it's the role that we're expected to abide by, right? So what obligations do I have, right, as a woman, as a mom, as a daughter? What privileges do I have? How do people expect me to behave? How are those attached to my gender? How do you behave, or how do you expect your male professors to behave different from your female professors? How do you expect your mom to behave different from your dad? What are some of the norms of expectation, right? So we expect women to show their emotion more, so they're more likely to actually show their emotion. Whereas we don't expect men to show their emotions, and they receive a lot of negative sanctions for showing their emotions and even identifying their emotions as children. So you don't see it very often. And so those gendered messages, they're sent to us through both the significant other and the generalized other. Society tells us all kinds of gendered messages, but so do our friends and family, right? They might make a joke because something we wore, or they might give us a positive sanction by saying, oh, that's so beautiful. You're actually wearing a dress today, because you never wear dresses as a girl, but the expectation is there within the social structure of our society, right? And then same thing with our roles, right? As a mom versus a dad, you know, you may be upset with your mom for not making you dinner or helping you with your laundry, but you're not upset with your dad for not making you dinner or helping with your laundry. Not because of you or that person specifically, but because of the expectation of the role that is set up, right? So those typical patterns were formalized long before we were here. And they very much help to socialize us within society. And they do so through all of the different types of agents of socialization: family, friends, neighborhood, school, television, video games, workplace, religion, music, all these things. We can go on and on, really, right? All of those things either subtly or fervently act as forms of control or forms of socialization for us. Okay, so our need to know terms, let's go through these quickly. A group is any interaction of individuals with common values, interests, or norms. So basically, anybody who thinks of themselves as belonging to a group is a group. An aggregate is just people who simply are sharing the same place. So if you go to the flea market and it happens to be really packed, you are in an aggregate of people. A category is just a statistics, right? A statistic of people. You might say older Black voters or young female activists, right? That would be a statistic, that number that you associate to those particular people that fit into that category. Primary groups are the people that you're closest to and most associated with. That is almost always first your family and then later your friends and family. A secondary group are people that you are in formal groups with, so classmates, colleagues, that type of thing. Your in-group and out-group, this is easiest to understand if you think about like high school cliques. So your in-group is the people you're loyal to, your friends inside the clique. Your out-groups are the people that you're antagonistic with, other cliques, right? And then a reference group is the group by which you tend to evaluate yourself against, right? Are you evaluating yourself against all of society, other people within your age group, other people within your community, other people within your class? That's a reference group. Here's your discussion study guide. Take a moment to see if you can answer these questions in writing, and have a great day.